Steve Pierce with shortwingpipers.org. We've disassembled the Scout 3200 Alaskan Bushwheel Tailwheel. Now after we've cleaned it, we're going to inspect it and reassemble it. One of the most common problems that I find on these is between the head assembly and the tailwheel spring. There's a spacer here, and this head assembly is 1 3/4 inches wide. If you're using like a Pawnee tail spring, it fits right up without an adapter. This is 1.5 inch adapter. This is 1 1/4 inch adapter for a standard, say a Super Cub or a short wing piper. These are held in with a bushing. It goes through the head assembly, and an AN7-21 bolt attaches it to the spring. What we find a lot of times is the head to the spring is loose. It'll rock back and forth, and it starts to tear things up in this aluminum head assembly. So a good thing on a pre-flight is to take this head and shake it, move it back and forth, and see if you've got play. Keep from tearing up expensive parts. Fork assembly. Now this is a baby bushwheel fork, but it's identical to the standard fork, other than it's wider. You've got 2 spring steel lock springs that lock the tail wheel when you're taxiing it, and they fit into these grooves here. Now these springs should be sharp on the edges, not rounded. Over time they'll wear out, they'll get rounded, and they need to be replaced. To replace those, you take this bronze bushing here out, then knock out this pin, and then you can slip these springs and the spacer out. Which brings up a good point. If you're going to work on this tail wheel, I suggest you get on the internet. This is on the Alaskan Bushwheel's website is a tailwheel and fork assembly parts breakdown. Gives a parts description, part number, and exploded view to help with disassembly, reassembly, and ordering new parts. Another thing that on this fork assembly is this pin. This pin holds the thrust plate in place, keeps it from rotating around. If this pin gets worn, this thrust plate will spin, get out of its groove, and start tearing pieces up. All these parts need to be inspected, and they're wear and tear items. This is one that's been worn, chewed up, broken. On the new Alaskan Bushwheels, there is a hole underneath this pin that you can knock it out. If you've got an older style tail wheel, you can drill a hole in this pin. It's a steel pin and an aluminum fork. Use an easy out to pull it out and replace that pin. Other wear item, the steering arm. These grooves that are cut into the steering arm will get rounded off, and it won't lock, and at that time you have to replace the steering arm. Okay, thrust plates should be smooth. They're made out of brass. Check your top thrust plate. These pins get loose, and if so, they need to be replaced. Seals. Alaskan Bushwheels makes these new lipped seals for the axle and for the pivot point on the bottom of the tail wheel. The old seals were these metal seals with a felt ring in there. These don't last very long, don't work very well, don't keep much out, so I really like these lipped rubber seals. The pawl seen here, there's 2 paws. There's a short paw and a long paw. And what that paw does is when you've got the assembly put together, that paw slips in here, and you want the long side down, because that is what retains, that notch there retains this brass thrust washer. When you turn, that paw comes over and kicks this spring in, allowing it to free caster. Now, with these paws, to pull that out before there is a short paw and a long paw. The long paw will kick make it free castering with less rudder travel, and I prefer the long paw myself. Some people don't, so that's an option there. And the same thing with these springs. A light-tailed airplane will have 3 of these springs, where a heavy-tailed airplane, like say a Cessna 180, will have 5 of these springs. And what that does is that puts more tension on this head, and it makes it harder to turn, to pivot on this assembly. So on a light-tailed airplane like a Cub or a short wing, I prefer the 3 springs. Make sure your bearings are, you've got bearing races, you've got a bearing race here, bearing races in the wheel. Look for water spotting on the races and the bearings, and replace those as necessary. And those are the common things to look at when you've got it taken apart, disassembled, and cleaned.